Get started. So,
Sorry.
So welcome everyone. I'm Emily Barros, and I started Bold Story Press last August in the middle of a pandemic. Today I'm going to cover some of the basics about publishing so that you are better informed if you are a writer and want to publish, about what your options are and what kinds of decisions you'll have to make, what kinds of things you should be thinking about. So I'm going to run through some slides here in a PowerPoint deck, and then we will have plenty of time for questions, and I would love to answer any questions you have at all. So we'll get started. And it's probably easier if you put yourself on mute for this part of the presentation. So I'm Emily Barros, and I have 32 years in the publishing industry. My last role in publishing was as editor-in-chief of a division of McGraw-Hill in New York, where I managed 100 editors and a $500 million publishing program. I've published hundreds of best-selling books. And when I started out in the industry, it was, they followed kind of an apprenticeship model where they wanted everyone to have experience in jobs across the organization so that we would understand better. They wanted us to have sales experience so we would understand better how books sold, why they sold, why the market embraced some books and not others. They wanted us to have marketing experience so that we would have hands-on experience promoting books. And then I came back to editorial acquisitions, which was my passion, and worked my way up through the role of publisher and then eventually vice president, editor-in-chief. Publishing today is very different than it was when I was starting out, and that's obvious. There were no digital books, there were no ebooks when I was starting out. There were so many publishing houses when I was starting out, and through the years, publishing houses have been gobbling each other up. Until now, we are left with about 5 large trade publishing houses. And I'm sure you know who they are: Penguin, HarperCollins. I'm not going to think of the others. The way people buy books, it has completely changed. Many bookstores have gone out of business. There's only really one big bookstore chain left, Barnes and Noble. While some independent stores have held on, 70% of books are bought online now, and most of them are bought on Amazon. Ebooks are a big deal. I would have thought that that it would be the younger generation that's buying ebooks, and people my age and older, are clinging to loving that print book and turning the pages because that's the way we grew up. That's what our experience was. However, the opposite is true. More people my age, 50 years and older, are buying ebooks because they like the convenience of being able to carry the books around, multiple books around on that small ebook device. And more young people, especially young adult fiction, are buying books, the physical books, because they like to collect books in a series. They love the covers. They want to see them on their bookshelf. So ebook buying and print book buying are both going strong. It's about 60% ebooks versus 40% print books. When you think about writing and publishing a book, in my experience, there are a series of reasons that authors want to publish, and no one way is right, but here are some of them. that the author is passionate about the topic, and that you usually see that with nonfiction books. So it could be a topic in business, it could be a textbook, an education book, but being passionate about a topic is one motivation. Some writers, some of my authors have talked about writing, and more often I've heard this with fiction books, as that there is a story inside them, fully formed, and they feel compelled to get it out. So the story is there, it's their job just to get it out onto the page. And when those authors would talk about that process, after I got over feeling envious, because wouldn't that be wonderful if there was a story inside and all I had to do was get it out, I thought about that movie Alien, you know, where the body splits open and the aliens come out. But those authors tended to be pretty successful. Some authors write to make money because they love writing and they want to make writing their profession. And so they are looking for ways to make a living out of writing books. Some authors write to have impact. And that's not that different from being passionate about a topic, but in the nonfiction areas, people write to influence others' thinking and wanting to change the world or change one person at a time in the world. Entrepreneurs, more and more frequently, are writing books in order to grow their business. And if you are an entrepreneur, it is a credential that immediately gives you credibility and authority in your market. Interestingly, it doesn't matter how you publish that book, whether it's self-published or with a small publishing house. It doesn't matter if the book ever sells any copies, because really people don't have a way of checking that, nor would they. And so just saying you're an author as an entrepreneur immediately makes people think you're an expert, and you could write gobbledygook and never have a single person buy the book, but it is a strategy that works. Some people write to leave a legacy, and often memoirs are written for that reason. The author wants to leave something behind when they shuffle off this mortal coil, and or they want to document family history and memories that they know may die with them. When you're thinking about writing and publishing a book, you need to think about for whom you are writing. Who is your market? Who will need your book? Who will want your book? Maybe even more important, who will pay for your book? What do you know about these readers, and how will you reach them? And so we often encouraged our authors to fully flesh out this model reader, and to really think about who this person was, what their buying habits were, what kinds of things they were interested in, so that they could have that person in mind as they were writing their book. And it often helped them to stay focused on issues or content that would be most helpful to that reader. You also need to think about, do you need to make any changes internally or externally in order to write a book and publish it? I don't know if any of you can relate to this, but I'm 63, and I have been saying at least for 30 years that I'm going to write a book and publish it, and I have not done it yet. So I've published lots of other people's books, but I have not written my own. And so I know, and certainly from my experience as an editor, that if you fit that profile, someone who's been talking about it for many years but haven't made any substantive progress, that something needs to change. because one of my favorite sayings, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. And so if you've only been talking about writing a book forever and nothing has changed, maybe it's time to come up with a plan and start changing your daily routine. Another favorite quote, and especially for women authors, this is by Marianne Williamson. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. Before I started Bold Story Press, and after I left publishing, I started a business and ran a business called Bold in Business. And my mission with that business was to teach women in the business world how to overcome the people-pleasing tendencies and perfectionism that gets in the way of women taking risks, and taking bold action. And I learned a lot during that time about how we motivate ourselves, how we can change. But one of the things I learned is that perfectionism, and women writers particularly struggle with perfectionism, as in, well, who am I to write this? There are plenty of people out there who are smarter or more accomplished than I am, and who would ever read this book? But also perfectionism shows up when authors are unwilling to say, okay, it's good enough, and I'm going to turn it over now to an editor or a publishing house and find out what they think and whether or not they will publish it. So what happens instead is that women authors are more likely to keep editing and refining and tweaking and never really letting the manuscript go so that they can take the next step in the process. I don't know if any of you can relate to that, but it's something to be aware of. There are basically 5 phases of publishing that we're going to talk about: writing, editing, design, production, and launching the book. When it comes to writing, I've seen there's more than one style of writing and more than one way to write a book. Some people are very disciplined, very process-oriented, and they often start with a table of contents and think about the bones of their story, laying down their chapters in their table of contents. And then they go in and they write out a paragraph or two about each chapter. So they're fleshing out the story arc with each chapter. And then they go back over and over again, laying down more detail on top of that table of contents as they flesh out their chapters. So putting the story arc in place and developing their characters and writing their dialogue for their characters. Some people write the way I do, and that is I sit down at the computer and I download everything in my brain about my topic. Everything, every question I have, every idea I have, every literal phrase that I've thought about, and every tiny piece of information that I can. And then I go back, and it's the opposite process. I go back and I start to weed out the content that doesn't belong in the story or doesn't enrich the story or move it along in some way. And I keep editing that out until I get to a point where I feel good about the story organization, the story arc, and then I start to lay in more details in my revisions. So it doesn't matter what your style is, but being aware of it will help you meet challenges as they come along. When you're writing, you can write your complete manuscript and get it to the point where you know you're not going to be able to make it any stronger without the help of another professional. And at that point, you may want to hire a developmental editor to read your manuscript and to give you feedback. And then there are people who have a story to tell and they want to tell that story, but they don't have the time or the interest to do the writing themselves. And for those folks, if you have the resources, you can hire a ghostwriter. And with a ghostwriter, you're sitting down over a series of conversations, downloading your brain and your story to the writer so that the writer can create the story. If you don't already have one, I strongly recommend that you develop a writing habit, that you develop some kind of discipline around your writing. For most people, that's writing something every day. And the most successful writers I know commit to writing every day at a certain time for a certain period of time or for a certain number of words. So Stephen King has a wonderful book on writing called On Writing. And in it, he talks about how when he started writing, he would go into his office every morning, sit down at the computer, open the computer and write from 8 until 12. And what he found over time was that he was training his muse, his creative voice, to show up every morning when he opened that computer and put his hands on the keys. And for him, he does that every day, regardless of whether or not he's experiencing writer's block. He sits at the computer and he types something. And it could be, I can't think of what to say today, or it could be, writing about your day, but just staying at the computer and writing is a way to continue the habit, which will help you to drive the content and to get it out. At some point, you're going to need some critical review. You cannot read your own writing over and over and over again and see clearly and objectively where you may need help. We become inured to our own writing after we see it over and over and over again, and it's almost impossible to see issues. So you can have a family member or a friend read the manuscript and give you feedback. You can learn to self-edit, that's a skill that you can develop and should develop. Or you can hire an editor and work with an editor. The challenge of asking family and friends to read your material and comment on it is that most of us don't know how to give constructive feedback to someone we love. And sometimes it's not even possible. Sometimes if someone you love, let's say a partner, gives you feedback that is constructive, but means that you need to make changes, that what you have is not as strong as it could be, sometimes that hurts. And there's no way around that. So in my experience, family members, especially spouses, boyfriends, girlfriends, are going to go easy on you, and you're not going to get the feedback that you need. And so having an objective set of eyes reading your content and telling you honestly, openly, and explicitly what's wrong and what you need to change makes any story stronger. So I highly recommend that you work with an editor. There are different kinds of editing. There is proofreading, Proofreading is what happens at the end of the process, usually after the manuscript has gone to the compositor. The proofreader is reading for typos, for maybe a little bit for grammar, for any kinds of spacing issues that may have been introduced at the compositor. So the proofread is the final check that's catching any kind of egregious misspellings or spacing. Copy editing is an edit by a skilled, experienced editor who will read your content, comment on grammar issues, check your writing for style issues. All copy editors work with some style manual. At Bold Story Press, we work with the Chicago Manual of Style. And then copy editors are also able, not all of them, but some of them are able to also comment on your dialogue, on your story arc, etc. Developmental editors are the most experienced and skilled editors that you can hire. They're also the most expensive. But a developmental editor is not only going to comment on issues as they find them, a developmental editor is also going to comment, in the margin where you need to change content, but also show you examples of how they would do it. And sometimes they will rewrite little sections of your text for you to show you what they're talking about. A developmental editor is concerned about story arc, about tension. Are you creating tension so that your readers want to stay with you through 300 pages? And if not, she's going to have suggestions for how to accomplish that in your writing. Design is the fun part. I think it's the fun part. Every book needs a book design, so that's the interior of the book. And sometimes with a black and white paperback book, a novel, a book that doesn't contain any art or photographs, it's going to be simple, but you'd be surprised. The fonts have to be chosen, the font sizes have to be chosen, the chapter opening titles have to be chosen and designed. So that there's more that goes into a book design than you may be aware of, and every book needs to have an interior design. Most of you are aware of the cover design, which is a lot more fun. And usually what happens in that process is that the editor will ask the author to submit some examples of covers that the author likes or the author thinks will fit the story, the feel that they're going for with their book. The editor is also going to have input to the designer there. And the designer comes back with 3 or 4 designs from which the author can choose. And then more tweaking happens, more changes happen until the cover design looks exactly the way the author and editor want it to look. If there is an art program, and this applies more to coffee table books, with lots of glorious 4-color photographs, or textbooks where you have a lot of different elements in the book. So bulleted lists, material that's boxed off and set aside. What else? Recipes, menus, any other kinds of design elements. Those are all going to need to be designed by the designer and would be part of the art program. Production. If you haven't been through the process before, there are a number of things you'll need to think about in the production process. If you're self-publishing, you'll need to think about what trim size your book will be. And to some extent, the market will dictate the trim size. When you're thinking about your trim size, you want to go and find comparable books that already exist in the market and look to see what trim sizes they are. But if a market is generally, memoirs are generally published in 5x8 trim size. And if you come out with an 8x10 memoir, your book is going to stand out, and not in a good way. So it's important that you're paying attention to what trim sizes the market is already using in your genre, and use those trim sizes. Having said that, there are times when if a book is particularly long and we want it to appear less long, or if it's particularly short and too skinny, we may shrink the trim size a little bit, or go to a slightly larger trim size just to control the size of the book and the number of pages. You're going to have to make decisions about paperback versus hardback. You're going to have to think about your binding options. So most books today are glued in, and that's called perfect binding. But some books, if they're an educational book and you want the book to lie flat, there are bindings that you use specifically for that. So, and of course, very high-end, expensive books will be sewn. The signatures will be sewn into the book. So there are different decisions to be made there too. And then finally, paper. You have to decide what kind of paper you're going to use. Most books today are printed on 50-pound white paper. If you want a heavier, richer feel, you can go to 70-pound paper. If you have a lot of 4-color photographs or art that you want to be crisp and detailed looking, you're going to need to use coated paper. That's why with coffee table books, you'll find that glossier paper. And that's because with regular 50-pound paper, the ink soaks into the page, and your photographs are going to look a little blurrier, a little less crisp. With coated paper, your 4-color art is going to sit on top of the page and not bleed into it, and that's going to give you that crisper look. All of those options, however, have different price points, and obviously the coated paper is more expensive than 50-pound paper. And you're also going to have to think about some ebook decisions. Your ebook is going to have a similar design, but need to be formatted for ebook platforms. So you'll have to make decisions about how to do that so it can be uploaded to Amazon and to the other 5 or 6 ebook platforms. And finally, you have to think about launching your book. And that's about selling and promoting the book. We actually don't know how many books are being published every day, but I've heard huge numbers, and it's certainly in excess of 1 million books a year. We don't know because Amazon doesn't release that data, and the huge majority of those books are being self-published on Amazon, where the author took their Word file or PDF file and uploaded it to the Kindle program, KDP, and they have a book instantly. There are millions of books on Amazon, and there are millions of really bad books on Amazon. I don't know if you've ever read any of them, if you've ever bought any of the dollar books when they're having those sales, or taken books out of the Kindle library, but there's a lot of bad writing out there where clearly no other pair of eyes ever looked at the material and helped the author refine it and get it to where it needed to be. And some of that writing will never be where it needs to be. However, those authors, have had the joy of publishing their book, and there's certainly something to be said for that. So launching your book in today's environment is harder than than it ever has been before, just because of the sheer numbers, the sheer volume of books being published every day. And so you want to make sure that you have a launch strategy for your book, a plan for how you're going to promote your book to the world when it publishes. If you think your book has any potential for big sales, you should be hiring a book publicist, no question. Even with the major publishers, if you were to sign with one of the big publishers, they are going to require you to be involved in the promotion and to take on some portion of that work yourself. And in many cases, they're not going to sign you in the first place unless they believe that you have a community of potential buyers out there and a community you can reach, usually through social media. And so with any submission to an agent or to a publisher, they are going to ask you how many followers you have on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, because they want to know how many people out there will buy your book when it publishes. You're going to need to think about ebook promotions because they are different than a print book promotion, how you're going to, what kind of strategy you're going to put in place for your ebook sales. If you have a mailing list, you'll be thinking about what kinds of direct mail pieces you can send out to them to announce that the book is published. And of course, you're going to be asking everyone you know, friends, family, the world, to buy the book on Amazon and write a review for you on Amazon. I should tell you that even years ago with major publishers, our marketing budgets were never large enough to market books, all of our books. And so what often happened was books that were by proven authors who had published with us before and had successful books, we would invest promotion dollars into those books. But the rest of the books tended to get thrown into the deep end of the pool, and our marketing people would wait to see which of those books started to generate sales, either through the work of the author or just on word of mouth. And once those books started to take off, the marketing staff would make the decision to invest some of the marketing dollars in those books. But if you think that by going with a large publisher, you're guaranteed a big ad budget, that's not true. And so no matter with whom you sign your book, you are going to be involved in promoting your book if sales are important to you. There are different types of publishers. There are traditional publishers. Self-publishing is an option for everyone. There are hybrid publishers, and then there are service providers. They're not really publishers, but they are a way to get published. With traditional publishing, you have to have an agent to have your manuscript evaluated by a traditional publisher. I have a friend who was an editor-in-chief at HarperCollins for the children's and young adult literature lists. And she said it was 25 years ago, when they reached the point of receiving 25,000 unsolicited manuscripts a year. And it was at that point that they realized they simply could not sustain their publishing evaluation and the process by which they chose books, the way they were doing it, because they couldn't keep up with the volume. And it was at that point that they decided that they needed to put gatekeepers in between themselves and the public, and that's why agents now are required for all major publishers. And the gatekeepers play the role of sifting through that volume of books and making decisions about which books are good and which ones are not good. And the process, if you want to be signed by a traditional publisher, is not easy from what I hear from my authors. Often it can take 6 months to hear back from agents, and too often their response is, sorry, but we're rejecting your book. And then even if you do successfully find an agent, sometimes it can take another 6 months to a year before the traditional publishers respond to the agent after they've submitted your book to them. And you can wait up to 18 months just to find out that your book has been rejected. So traditional publishing, while the reasons are obvious why people want to go with traditional publishers, it is not, traditional publishing does not guarantee you that you're going to get the treatment and the investment from the traditional publisher that authors once did. With traditional publishing, the publisher pays the author a small advance, usually in the $10,000, $5,000 to $10,000 range. And then they pay for all of the costs. So that means editorial, design, all of the other costs involved in producing, publishing, printing, publishing, and promoting a book. And then when the book starts to sell, you receive between 10 and 15% of the royalties. And an advance is not a gift, it's an interest-free loan. So if they give you $10,000, the book sales have to recover that $10,000 before you start to see royalties. With my friend who works at Harper was telling me the story of one of her editors came to her one day and said, "I got this manuscript and it's pretty good, and I really think you should look at it." And so she said, and it's by a young woman who was a sophomore in college. She's 20 years old. So my friend Kate was a little skeptical. Usually books from 20-year-olds are, not best-selling material, but she read the manuscript that night and found that it was really good. And it was the first book in a proposed series of books. So the next day they got in touch with the agent and they said, "We'd like to bid on this." It was an auction bidding, so all of the major publishers were interested in bidding on the book, and the bidding got up to $1 million. And so Harper paid this 20-year-old college sophomore $1 million advance for her book. And it turns out that was an excellent investment because the book was Divergent. And I've never read Divergent, but from what I understand, it's a very successful series of young adult fantasy books that were spun off into movies, into television shows, and made millions and millions and millions of dollars. So it is possible to find an agent, get your agent into the hands of an editor, get an editor and a publishing house excited about your book, and to be wildly successful. But the numbers are, it's very difficult. It's a very small number of people who get there. With self-publishing, you take your own files and upload them to Amazon or Ingram also has a good program called Ingram Spark. And you hire your own editor to take you through the editing process. You hire your own designer to do your interior design and your cover design. And you upload your own book onto their platforms, both for ebook delivery and for print delivery. The good news about self-publishing is when the book publishes and starts to sell, you receive all of the royalties. And if your book is successful and starts to take off, that's sweet. But there are some risks with self-publishing, and one of them is there are so many editors and designers out there on Google and out there in the available marketing, advertising on the internet, that you don't know if you're getting a good editor, and you don't know if you're getting a good designer until you've paid them and you're in the process with them. And I have an author who is a delightful woman in her late 70s who took up this this passion project after her husband died and spent years writing this novel. And she hired an editor that she found online, and the editor charged her $15,000 to edit her manuscript. And that's a sin. I mean, she was just ripped off royally, because when she sent her manuscript to us and we evaluated her manuscript, we had to reject it because we didn't think that the story was good enough to be of the quality of books that we publish, and we didn't believe that our editors could help her get it there. And so to be ripped off to the tune of $15,000 was really insult added to injury. So if you are self-publishing, be careful and make sure that you require editors to give you evidence and specific examples of their work. And I also recommend that you have them mark up some of your manuscript to show you what they can do before you commit to them and hire them. Hybrid publishers, and that's what Bold Story Press is a publishing business that is a foot in both worlds, in the sense that we do all of the editorial and design, and the editors and designers who work with me are people I worked with in the industry for those 30 years. So they're very, very experienced and professional. But we charge the author a flat fee up front to cover some of the costs associated with design and editorial. And then we do all of the work in the background, making decisions about trim size, paper. We do the metadata research, we register the copyright, we get the ISBNs, and we set the author up with a promotion strategy. We help them develop that strategy, but it is up to them to implement the promotion strategy. And then at the end of the process, when the book publishes, instead of getting that 10 to 15% royalty, we give you 60 to 70% of the royalties, and we take the smaller piece. So it's sharing the risk more, in the sense that you're putting in some money up front, we're investing, and then at the end of the process, you're the one who's profiting more from your book's success than the hybrid publisher is. And then editorial service providers, they're not publishers, but there are plenty of them online too, if you Google that. And they are the folks who will edit your book, design your book, perform some of these other services like the metadata research for a flat fee. They will work with any author. They are not curated in any way. At Bold Story Press, we publish about 25% of the manuscripts we receive, and we reject the other 75%. But an editorial service provider will work with anyone. And so they charge you a flat fee with their profit built into that fee. So it's kind of like self-publishing, but you're working with someone who are vetting the editors and designers for you. So if there's anything that I want to leave you with, it is that in order to publish your book, you need to have a plan. And if you don't yet have a plan, I hope some of the content and the information I shared with you today will help you start that plan. But start thinking about how you're going to publish your book, because I am a big believer that the world would be a much better place if we had 50% of the voices in the world were women's voices. And this is my passion. We are still largely a patriarchal culture, and the publishing industry is still has very strong male biases. 8 out of the 10 best-selling books are authored by men. One of the ways the bias shows up in the industry is that more male authored books were sent off to the critical review sites like Kirkus, New York Times Book Review, etc. And so those books were critically reviewed, and that put them in the running for bestseller status on the New York Times Book Review or books list, and for awards. And obviously in policy, in politics, in journalism, in social media, men still dominate these spaces. And even, going into education, at the K through 12 level, men are still making decisions about what content is being put in front of young people. And our society still has a very strong male slant built into the, oh, sorry. And I believe the world would be a better place if we can start to change that bias and change that disproportionate situation. And that's why when I started Bold Story Press, I made the decision to publish only women authors in order to give back, but also to try to make up for any ways I may have perpetuated that bias in the industry in my 32 years. So I would appreciate it if you're on social media, if you would like us or follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and you can find us there at Bold Story Press. And I will stop talking, invite you to take yourself off mute, turn on your video if you want, but I'm happy to answer any questions for you or share any experience I have that will help you in the process. One last thing I want to say, is in this same vein of being passionate about women's voices, I think that that if you are passionate about publishing a story, that you should not get too caught up in worrying about whether or not it's going to be a bestseller or whether or not it's going to sell 10,000 copies. I think if you are passionate about publishing a story, that you should find a way to do that. And that's part of what I want to support for all women, either through Bold Story Press or individually, in these webinars. So after today, I'll send an email to all of you who attended today and offer a phone call if you want to ask any questions one-on-one instead of in the group. And I'm happy to set those calls up. So questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hello? Go ahead.
Rebecca, go ahead.
Oh, okay, great. Just when you talk about sharing the cost with the hybrid method that you have, can you give a range of what kind of a fee that the author would incur? And does it change depending on the kind of book?
It does change depending on the kind of book. Generally, it's in the $7,000 to $8,000 range as that flat fee. If you need heavy editing, heavy copy editing or developmental editing, we will come back to you and tell you that, and you can then go off and hire an editor to do that work, or you can work with one of our editors, but there's an added fee if you need more extensive editing than a proofread. Proofreading is what we include in our package.
Okay, thank you.
And to Karen's question, we do not work with agents, so we evaluate manuscripts ourselves as they come in. So if you have a manuscript ready to go and you want us to evaluate it, we would be very happy to read your material and tell you what we think.
Is there a charge for the evaluation?
No.
So I have two questions actually. So just what is like you were talking about your friend that got ripped off by the online editor, like what is a ballpark for, I'm sure it ranges a lot depending on the book and everything, but what's a ballpark should be normal?
A ballpark fee for what an editor would charge?
Yeah.
For a decent copy editor, they're going to be between $30 and $50 an hour.
Okay.
And for a book that doesn't need, for a book that needs, let's say, a moderate copy edit that doesn't need a complete overhaul, didn't start out as we have a book right now that we really like, but it's 340,000 words. And it's way too, it's like, we should cut 2/3 of it. And that is so time consuming to have an editor work through that much content. And so we're talking to the family and saying, look, the author is 90. The author is 90, and this book that she submitted to us, and she learned about us through a friend who took one of my publishing classes and is 80 years old herself, but this book is a bodice ripper. It's a romance novel. It is a bodice ripper. She's 90 years old and it's really good, but it's like way too long, way too long. So yeah, it depends on how much work you need, but generally speaking, you're not going to need to do more than like between 2,000 to 3,500, 2,000 to 3,500, and maybe even less, depending on how much editing you need.
Okay. And then my next question is, you talked a lot about editing, but you talked about like content editing. So what if you have a book that is, say, historical? Who proves the accuracy of the facts that you're putting in the book? What is that person called?
Well, you have to do that. The author has to do that. And any publishing contract that you sign is going to hold you responsible for the content, both accuracy and copyright. And so it's also your responsibility to ensure the publisher that everything in your manuscript is yours and is not something that you picked up that was copyrighted by someone else. And that sounds obvious, but even at McGraw-Hill, when I was working with PhD authors at Harvard, we had situations where when we did a check of the content, we found that there was material there, in one case, a whole chapter of content that the author had taken from another book. And that would have been a massive lawsuit for us if we hadn't caught it. And he claimed, and I believed him, that he had taken that content years ago when he started teaching and incorporated it into his notes. And then, his file grew over the years, and 30 years later, he decides to write his own textbook. Well, he didn't realize then that he had taken it from another book. He thought it was his own notes. And so, but yeah, you have to make sure that it's accurate and that it's original.
Okay.
If it makes you feel better, that happened to Dorothy Kearns Goodwin.
Did it?
Well, yeah, she accidentally plagiarized something. I think it was in A Team of Rivals.
Wow.
I think, or it could have been the one on baseball, but it was one of her major hits. She accidentally plagiarized something.
And she looks as honest as the day is long. Like you can't believe she would do that intentionally. Yeah.
So this, I haven't written a book yet, but that's why, like, when I'm writing anything, an article or anything, I make sure to reference if I pulled it from someone else. I make a citation, and that's really important to the question about hiring a researcher or someone like that for a historical book. You need to have your citations in order. It's okay to quote as long as you give credit, but you must make sure you're giving that credit, or you end up in that situation that Emily just outlined.
So Cecilia commented in the chat that her editing fee is $75 to $85 per hour. Of course, you can find great editors who, and generally speaking, the best people are more expensive. And you can hire a researcher to double check your facts. Absolutely. And that's a very good point, Cecilia. Thanks for adding that.
This is Diane. Thank you. That was a great presentation for someone who's always thought about writing a book, has written a lot, but not a book. I have the time. The question is the money. I really appreciated your resources. I've heard about Stephen King's book, so I will order that. I wonder if there's anything you can tell us now, or a resource. I wonder how much of a risk it is. So I have the time now, but a financial risk. So how much are you putting in? So I've heard, I'm sorry if I missed it, but I was getting confused by all the different costs. And I've helped publish a lot of books too. I know it can get really costly, but usually there's somebody paying for it. So how much of a risk is it for someone? You talked about design and proofreading, the development, having some of these you can find. I have a lot of chits after so many years. I'm, your vintage plus. So I have a lot of chits I could call in, but it's going to cost a bit of money in case it doesn't sell anything. So
Yes, that is true. And a friend was telling me about an author she has that really wanted to publish her book. And when she, sat down and figured it all out, because as I said, if you think that your book has real potential, we strongly encourage you to hire a book publicist, to get the word out. Those are the folks who have the connections to the Today Show, to the local network channels, who will, interview you on the 5 o'clock news, or who will get you on the right radio interviews, podcasts, et cetera, and will get the word out that the book exists. But they're not cheap. Right. And I know from my experience at McGraw-Hill and at other major publishers that 80% of the books we published did not make their sales numbers, and most of them never recovered their costs. So we ran our business, and in my division, we published almost 400 books a year. We ran our whole business on the profit we made from the 20% of books. Right. So, and in my experience, that model holds up. 80% of books don't, break out or sell any substantive number of copies. So when push comes to shove, your book has to be really well written. That is and always will be the thing that distinguishes you from other books, because we all know that we've read best-selling books or books on the bestseller list that were okay, but not great. They're not great writing. Let's face it. Especially, the airport books, the guys who write all of those Baldacci and all of those books. But this woman, was sitting down doing the math and said, okay, $8,000 for this, $2,000 for this, $10,000 for this, it's going to cost $20,000. And how can I justify that? I have no idea how well it will sell. I have no idea if I'll recover my investment, if I'll make money, if I'll lose money. And then she thought about her husband, who was going through a midlife crisis and had just bought a Lamborghini, and they're like $75,000. And so she thought, you know what? I don't actually care how many copies this book sells. This has been my dream my whole life. And even if this book never recovers the initial investment, I'm going to do this for me. I am going to publish this book. This book is going to be left in the world after I am gone. My family, I can give it to my family and friends. I'm going to do it for the joy it will give me. And I'm not going to worry about how many copies it sells. And to be honest, I tell my authors that they should plan on breaking even, not being a New York Times bestseller, just because the numbers are so stacked against you. I'm not saying it can't happen, but I would hate for people to be disappointed and to think of themselves as a failure if the books aren't breakout sellers. I think if you want to publish a book, doing it because it's always been a dream of yours and will give you joy is a good reason to publish the book, personal opinion.
Well, I don't want to take up any more time. I think my question is, that was helpful, except, okay, so if it's your dream, how much am I gonna invest to at least put my best effort forward? Is it 10? Is it 20? 30,000? That. So I can research it, but that's really would be helpful to know.
Well,
That's part of your plan, I guess, is, you want to try to break even, but what if you don't? So how much have you put down? Anyway.
I think you have to think about, I completely understand why you're asking the question and why you want to know, but that is a transactional way to look at the process, and you have to write it first. And if you don't enjoy the process of writing it, then there's no money. There's not enough money in the world. 100,000 words is a lot to write. So if I were you, I would join a writers group. And if you're here in the DC area, there are lots of good writers groups that you can join. And I would find out if you enjoy writing and if you enjoy the process, and then, keep going if you are. And, at any point along the way, you can make the decision, do I want to invest, or do I want to self-publish, or do I want to,
Go on to interior decorating.
Right.
Okay.
I think Karen asked about fiction and nonfiction. We publish both fiction and nonfiction. Most of what we are publishing are novels and memoirs. But we do have we have a couple children's books, and we have a wellness book. And so, yeah, we publish both. Other questions?
Emily?
Yeah.
Hi. I'm Rosita. I have a question.
I'm sorry, what's your name?
Rosita?
Rosita, okay.
Rosita, yes.
Okay.
So I have a question with regard to, I was listening to you talk about the section on why you want to write. I am interested in publishing, actually developing it to a point to publish, because I want to document family history and legacy. What I want to do, I write poetry. I do not write poetry in the sense of performance, but I've been writing poetry simply based upon my own experiences and those of other people that I interact with. So I have my own poetry. I also have poetry that is very good, which mine probably is not, but that which I have a family member who has passed on, but who did a lot of very traditional poetry and poetry presentations, but her work has never been copywritten. And I am the recipient of that through inheritance, all of that work. So I'm interested in publishing her work as an editor. And that's a question that I have to figure out how to really go about. And maybe you can give me some suggestions, either offline later time, but that's where that's my goal at this point with regard to family. I don't really care how many copies are sold.
Okay.
Because
Rosita,
I'm
sorry to interrupt
yes.
you, but let's definitely plan to talk one-on-one. I'll send you an email
Okay.
to set up a call, and I'll share with you what I know.
Okay.
Okay. Josie.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have so much going on, and I failed to see that it was 12 Eastern time. So I'm very sorry for being so late. Is there a recording of this chat? Will I be able to plug in and watch it at a different time, or no?
There is a recording, and I don't usually send out the recording, but let's talk afterwards. Yeah.
Okay, I'll stick around. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Emily. This is Mindy. How are you?
Good, Mindy. How are you?
I'm good. This has been really helpful. Thank you. I was interested in learning a little bit more about the children's book publishing. I see, you have a few children's book authors. Like, how is the process different in terms of, authoring and illustrating? And does that need to sort of be done in advance and presented? Or is the process a little bit different than, adult fiction, nonfiction?
The process is very different. And I know a lot of people think that children's publishing is easier, right? Because it's not very many words but it's actually harder because the illustrations are such an important part of the storytelling. The visual component is married to the text in a way that it's telling part of the story and the text is telling part of the story. And there are a lot of factors that you have to think about with children's publishing that make it trickier. And so we do children's publishing, but it is not cheap. Like, illustrators are expensive.
And then what about if I was interested in doing an author and illustrator, doing both?
Well, that's the ideal. And so we would work with you, from the beginning to make sure, storytelling today for children, you want to make sure that the characters have agency, right? You don't want the little child or the little animal or whatever to always be saved by an adult. You want to teach children how to, make their own decisions and how to learn, et cetera. So there are a number of factors that are important in children's publishing, but we would evaluate your book and then come up with a plan for it based on the norms in the industry today. So have you already written it?
No, I'm just sort of thinking, and I honestly don't even know where to begin in terms of is this 100% digital these days, or are actual drawings and illustrations done by hand and then converted into digital? I'm sort of at the point in the process where, very beginning, where I'm not even sure, technique.
So there are a number of great articles online about children's publishing. They are a very active group, and I would recommend, Mindy, I'll make a note to send you one.
Thank you.
I would start researching. You'll find so much content on Google that will help you.
Mm-hmm.
So I would start educating yourself there, about things before you start writing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question about kids' books.
Sure.
I was told quite a while ago that publishers preferred writers to just send in a manuscript and they would find the illustrator that they most wanted rather than coming in with sort of a package thing. Is that still the case?
With one of the big 5 publishers, I believe it is the case. With a hybrid publisher, you are responsible for the art and the manuscript.
Okay.
So, and right now we have an author whom we have helped, find the right illustrator, and she's working with him. And then we have an author who is doing her own. So,
okay. Thank you. That helps.
Sure. Yes, Christine.
Hi. Thank you so much. This has been really, really informative. I listened to a couple of other webinars recently from the Maryland Writers Association that were discussing on the various published writers were talking about publication, and they were putting total emphasis or considerable emphasis on agents, on getting an agent and how to work with an agent. And you didn't say much about agents. I gather your organization, your publishing company doesn't require them, right? From what you said.
Yeah.
But could you give us just a little bit of advice on, is it helpful? Is it worth looking? Is it worth starting looking for an agent? And how how does one go about it? They implied in this other webinar that you don't pay the agent unless or until there's some money coming back in the way of a contract from the publisher, which made it sound like it's sort of no risk, but I wonder if that's true.
Yeah, you pay the agent when you get your advance. And actually, I think the publisher pays the agent the advance, but it's still you paying the agent because it's your money, really, right? So if you want to sign with a big publisher, you have to work with an agent. And, you know, obviously the trick is how do you get the attention of an agent? Because those 25,000 manuscripts, that was 20 years ago. So they are probably receiving, I don't know, 250,000 manuscripts now a year. I mean, and as an acquisitions editor whose responsibility it was to work on the books that I had already signed and to work on signing new books, when I had unsolicited manuscripts come in, the stack would grow and grow and grow, you know, next to my desk. And I hated working on that stack because I had to reject 90% of it. And I always felt a little bad about rejecting authors. So they sat there for long periods of time. And sometimes it can be a year. And so the trick when you're trying to engage an agent, you got to somehow get their attention in that query letter right away, because they're working through a pile of, you know, so high that they're just looking for reasons to say reject, reject, reject. So I would do all the research you can on, you know, how to make yourself and your story stand out.
And if I want to send my manuscript to you, which is only half written, by the way, but if and when I may want to send it to you, do you have a specific process like a query letter that's required and a synopsis and that sort of thing?
We do.
Is that explained on your website?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically we ask you for a prospectus, which is an overview of the book, you know, who the competitors are, what market it's for. We'll also ask you, do you have any social media community following you? But then we'll ask for a table of contents, a detailed table of contents, so a paragraph per chapter, and 2 to 3 chapters.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Cynthia, did I answer your question? I see your hand is up.
Hi, sorry, this is Cynthia. Let me get hi, thank you so much for this really informative webinar. My question is just, you mentioned there was an author, the older author whose manuscript is way too long. What's the ideal, or what is the number of words or pages that we should be aiming for if we're writing a book that we want for a popular audience?
It depends on the market, but generally speaking, you don't want to be longer than 100,000 words. So that's going to come in at that 350 pages, 300, 350 pages. So if you are writing, and you know, a good thing to do is go on Amazon and look at comparable books and see how long they are.
Okay, is there too short? Is there ever?
Yes.
What's the minimum number of words or pages?
Again, it depends on the market, but generally speaking, you don't want to be shorter than 200 pages. And so that's,
okay.
Yeah, 50,000 words.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure. Yes, I will email everyone and offer the call so we can talk more about what your individual writing projects are. Other questions? Well, thank you very much for coming and for your excellent questions. And I look forward to talking to those of you who want to talk more. Good luck to you with your writing. I hope I see your book on Amazon very soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you
Thank you.
very much. That's
Thank you.
great.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.